So we're now continuing with Griffin's book on human rights, and we're in chapter 3, When They Conflict. And this is section 3.1. I've labeled it B because I just wanted to finish up this particular section of this chapter. So if you haven't watched the previous video, which is where I started with this chapter, flip back to that. So in the previous video, we talked about clashes, right? That's the whole thing, is when stuff clashes, and especially in general, you need some kind of common measurement. And in human rights, when human right 1 clashes with 2, we need a common measurement, personhood. And so in comparing and contrasting these clashes, we have to say which one is better at valuing personhood. Then in the last lecture, I talked about unpacking the expression valuing something. How do you do that? And we looked at the question of honesty, like when the notion of valuing honesty can be taken in 2 ways. One can be instantiating and one can be promoting. Well, the answer to this one here about valuing personhood, the 2 frameworks, same thing. We are going to either take a deontological approach where we're going to say, well, when we value, we're going to look at which one values more, which one instantiates it. Right? So in that sense, we're going to value human rights for their own sake. Now consider, though, when you value something for its own sake, and it's just everything is about instantiating it, it's not valued through action. It's just you just instantiate it. It doesn't give it any more value. And in that sense, it can't be traded off, right? So human rights in this deontological framework, at least in Kant's, you can't really trade them off, because there's something that protects the notion of the freedom of the self, and that's sacrosanct. There's just there's nothing that you can compare it with or contrast it with. It's just something radically different. Think about when Kant talks about, I'm really loosely paraphrasing him, but in the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, he's very clear. What's the only good thing in the world? There's the only good really is a goodwill. That's it. We're good without qualification. Everything else is a good with qualification. So the only unqualified good is a goodwill. So that's something that has to be guarded, because there's just nothing like it. You can't trade off the goodwill for anything. Think about, when we talk about one of the most important things, like in certain kinds of religious orders for training. One of the like if you look at, for example, in Jesuits, in their order of training, Ignatius Loyola was very clear, the greatest thing you have is your freedom of the will. And to put that in the service of the order is, to be subservient to the service of the order, which of course is an expression of God. It's blah, blah, blah. But the point is that the most valuable thing you have is the notion of your will. It can't be traded off except handed over to God. So Kant is in that kind of tradition, except Kant is saying you don't really hand it over to anything except the moral law, right? That's how you want to get your will in line with the moral law. There's nothing down here, right, that you can trade it off, right? You cannot trade this extreme kind of good and unique good of the will. Can't be traded off. So human rights protect this, and so by extension or logically, it just follows that you can't trade it off. You can't sort of give up the human will in any way except the moral law, and so that's what human rights protect. So no trade-offs. So the right thing to do all the time is to make sure personhood is instantiated. Point final, as they say en français. So human rights are the protectors of something sacred. There's no lowering of the guard. Now, the 20th century saw some developments in deontology. So W.D. Ross says, well, we can slightly weaken this a little bit. So this gets into more complications regarding the deontological systems of ethics. And deontological systems of ethics, by that I mean a family of ethics. So although, lots of philosophers would be classified as deontologists, they're not all identical to Kant, right? So don't identify Kantian ethics with deontology. It is one species. So deontology is a family or a genus, and Kantian deontology is a species of it. W.D. Ross, or Rossian deontology, is another species. And W.D. Ross has a notion of prima facie obligations, which makes it, there's a little bit more wiggle room on it, but your primary obligation is always to instantiate human rights and to protect it to the maximum. So there's really no letting things down. Okay, so maybe you can have sort of, and Griffin kind of later on alludes to this, sort of the quasi-cat-like deontological positions where you might trade a human right off, maybe, but it would just have to be, a slight infringement on a human right is only possible if you have this gargantuan thing on the other side. So you could slightly infringe upon my human right in sort of a W.D. Rossian sort of deontological picture if the public good is just completely enormous, or if I don't go for this enormous public good at the cost of protecting, maybe we trade it off a little bit. But for Kant, it's absolutely not. So anyways, the takeaway is that valuing personhood from the deontological approach just simply is instantiating it. And so the one that instantiates it, that's the one that's going to work. So it's going to be a very, cut and dry thing. It's not as clear as it might seem yet for the deontological picture, but we'll see that in a later video in the series of videos on this particular chapter. So stay tuned for that. Well, the other one, of course, is the teleological approach. That's going to be more what Griffin's he definitely leans in that direction. And again, we're not valuing it just simply for its own sake. We're promoting it. We think it is a good. So the right thing to do is not independent of the good as it is here. The right thing to do is going to be dependent on what we're trying to bring about. So promoting is our key here. So if promoting means instantiating in a certain circumstance, go ahead and instantiate. But if promoting means not instantiating, well, that's fine too. Instantiating, is unconcerned with promoting. So in this case, promoting is primary. In this case, instantiating is primary. So try and get your head around that distinction. But with the teleological approach, which includes virtue ethics, which includes consequentialism, the key thing is you're trying to promote personhood as part of your valuing, right? And so in some cases, maybe, as we saw in the previous video, promoting honesty may mean, at least it's arguable, that in some situations the promotion of honesty may not be instantiating it. You might behave in a certain way where it's like, I'm going to not say anything now because I don't want to scare people off, and so I won't instantiate, and that actually might lead more people to be honest, because I'd be honest in other situations where you don't pay such a huge price. And in the sense, you could say, well, I'm only going to be honest in situations where the price is not that high to pay, because I know if I go above that price, people will stop being honest when the price is there, and they may even lower their price. So if you're a promoter of it, you might be making all kinds of judgments as to, you know what, in the end, it's better to keep a low sort of payment price on honesty. I'll be honest under that. And that'll actually lead to more honesty than if I try to become like a martyr and scare people or whatnot. So you can see it's very different reasoning when you're promoting versus when valuing is understood as promoting, as opposed to valuing purely understood as instantiating. So remember, that's what we're trying to keep straight, is valuing or as instantiating and valuing as promoting. Very different. That distinction, Griffin says, is right at the heart of normative ethics. So, but the thing is here, promoting might involve trade-offs, right? I traded honesty off when I was promoting it, right? I traded off. I chose some other action than instantiating honesty when I was promoting, when I had this teleological approach. Yeah, in some situations, I'm going to trade it off. I'm going to say, yeah, it's better for the sake of honesty to trade it off in some situations. I'm not going to do it, and I'll promote it that way. Well, the same thing here. There might be situations in which trading off a human right maybe we'll end up promoting it and you get more human rights in the end. That's and that protects personhood more because you get more personhood in the world. If that's your goal, is just to get more personhood in the world, it's a good. Well, that's a teleological approach. And instead, the deontological approach doesn't look at personhood like as trying to get more of it into the world, right? Because it's valuing it in for its own sake, not seeing it as a telos or a goal. So keep in mind, that these things, once you, again, as I said earlier, once you start thinking them through, they're fairly subtle little notions, and it forces you to avoid what we all do, is kind of slide back and forth as we see fit, right? Or as it's convenient, right? So that's what the ethical theories tend to put the brakes on sliding all over the place as it suits you, right? And that's what our emotions do, right? Because our emotions will move all over the place and they'll push you in certain directions at certain times. Well, so we're trying to put the brakes on those and look at it from a more logical perspective. And of course, that's another challenge in and of itself, whether we should even look at ethics from a rational, logical perspective. Some people would say not really. But in any case, we're at least playing the rational game when we dive into the heart of ethics. So we would have a situation you might not be, it's not the same that you're going to be flippant and like, yeah, I'll trade personhood off no matter what or very easily. No, that doesn't follow on this view at all. You would still be very leery because remember, you're trying to promote something. You do want to bring about as much as you can. You do want to be, your goal, your telos is, like as an analogous to being happy, one of your goals is having personhood, right? Is this capacity of choice and choosing to live a worthwhile life. You want that more in the world. So you're going to be really hesitant about trading that off. But you will if you think the trade-off will end up promoting it, as we did with the honesty one. So you just won't be as rigid about it, or if you will be more flexible, or whatever term you want to use. You're just not going to quite be like this approach. So in many cases, the two approaches could lead to the same result, but the important thing to think about is that in serious situations, they could lead to very different results.